With every passing generation, it feels like Game Freak keeps finding new ways to make Pokemon more and more ridiculous. Now, even Pokemon like Misdreavus and Delibird can be turned into absolute war crimes that dominate the meta. But despite this fact, there are a handful of classic Pokemon who have survived this power creeping to remain relevant for several years past their expected expiration date. So good morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR, and these are the Pokemon that survived power creep. Alright, I know you saw the thumbnail and you're probably dying to know, why is Electabuzz in the come up right now? Electabuzz hasn't been a relevant Pokemon in competitive since Electivire was introduced in Gen 4. And even Electivire is busier flipping burgers right now than he is contributing to the meta. So what gives? Why am I seeing Electabuzz everywhere now? Well, if you're out of the loop, the Pokemon VGC circuit just started Regulation H, a rule set that bans all legendary and paradox Pokemon. Say it with me, thank God! Which has resulted in a crazy amount of parity and diversity across the format. And Electabuzz has been one of the biggest winners. Thanks to the Eviolite item it can now use due to the aforementioned Electivire, Electabuzz boasts respectable defenses, and is able to use Follow Me, a move that redirects attacks at the user, which is very valuable in doubles. And it also has an ability that is somewhat slept on in the form of Vital Spirit, which is ironic, because it keeps you from falling asleep. Which, needless to say, is also very important in VGC, where moves like Spore and Sleep Powder are commonly used to create 2 versus 1 situations. If Electabuzz can redirect an incoming Spore attack with Follow Me and be immune to its effects, it's a massive win for the team. Something that its evolution Electivire isn't capable of doing since it loses Vital Spirit from Motor Drive. But the benefits of Electabuzz don't end there, as Electabuzz is also a remarkable defense against the always common rain teams, which are becoming even more powerful in the newest regulation, and nowadays mostly consist of Pelipper and Archaludon. Electabuzz obviously is a huge threat to Pelipper just by being an electric type, but it also tanks one of Archaludon's most powerful attacks, Electroshot, really well. It also has access to a litany of moves that are just really reliable in VGC in general, like Taunt, Volt Switch, Electro Web, and Helping Hand, just to name a few. With so many reliable options, Electabuzz has conquered power creep to stay relevant nearly 30 years later. While we're on this topic, why not discuss Electabuzz's Gen 1 brother-in-arms, Magmar? Magmar has also seen a great deal of usage in recent VGC formats. That's because it similarly can use Follow Me to redirect attacks, has Vital Spirit just like Electabuzz to keep itself awake, although it also has Flame Body, which is arguably even more useful in a lot of situations to spread burns on the opponent's team, and can also use the Eviolite item thanks to Magmortar now existing. Everybody say thank you to these two fathers who nobly gave up their viability for their sons to succeed. The current format doesn't benefit Magmar as much as it benefits Electabuzz with how rampant rain teams have been, but it has been putting up good numbers for a bit longer than Electabuzz has, so I think it deserves some recognition. And when it comes to Pokemon that routinely outperform their evolutions, Porygon 2 has to be included in that conversation. Porygon 2 has been a great Pokemon really ever since Eviolite was introduced in Gen 5, as it was already a Pokemon that boasted above average defenses. And while Porygon 2 has fallen off quite a bit in the single side this generation, it's more than made up for it with its presence in VGC. Porygon 2 is not only an effective Trick Room and Recover user in the current format, but it's also a great user of Terra Blast. Because Porygon 2 is naturally a normal type with a high special attack stat, it can use Terra Blast to great effect without even having to Terastallize. And with Terra Fighting, it becomes a solid counter to popular Dark and Steel types like the always popular King Gambit. Its ability download can also be a huge boost, as it has the chance to raise Porygon 2's special attack when it switches in if the opponent's special defense is lower than its physical defense. Thanks to that, Porygon 2 is in a unique position where it can play offense and defense at the same time, using Ice Beam to one-hit KO common threats like Dragonite and Garchomp, and in the previous formats, even Landorus Therian. And if you're unlucky and get the attack boost instead, Terra Blast can change to a physical attack, so it's not the end of the world. Man, I kinda feel bad for all the new evolutions introduced in Gen 4. It's beginning to feel like they're almost entirely overshadowed by the forms that they were supposed to be improving on. Murkrow and Dusclops are included in that, but we talked about them in another video, so get out of here, you creatures. But if there's one exception, it would have to be Gallade, who is quickly climbing the ladder. Despite being the shiny new evolution in Gen 4, receiving a Mega Evolution in Gen 6, and being an overall fan favorite, competitively, Gallade has sadly always lived in the shadow of its sibling, Gardevoir. Notice how I had to say sibling, because not all Gardevoirs are female, you weirdos. But the rise of Gallade in Gen 9 has been something to behold. Partly this is because it received a major buff in the form of its new ability Sharpness, which boosts the power of cutting moves by 50%. Guess which Pokemon has a lot of those at its disposal? Psycho Cut, Sacred Sword, Night Slash, Leaf Blade. Yeah, he's got a few. But even before receiving sharpness to drastically boost its power output, Gallade has always had a few good competitive tools in its learn set, including Wide Guard, which blocks all damage from spread moves, which includes the always popular Rock Slide, Muddy Water, and in the last regulation, Calorex's Astral Barrage and Glacial Lance. I'm still mad about that one, Game Freak. How does a Lance hit 2 targets? It doesn't! And it also has access to Trick Room, which is another powerful tool in doubles. For this reason, it also pairs wonderfully with the Sun/Terrain setters of Torkoal and Indeedee, and team synergy is sometimes half the battle when it comes to making the cut. So even when all those legendaries, and even the all-powerful Iron Valiant from the future were roaming around, Gallade was, and still is, regarded as a great team pick. But you know what's even more valuable than being a good team player? Being subscribed to this YouTube channel so you never miss a new video. We're getting really close to 250,000 subs, so every person counts. I really appreciate it. Surprisingly, this generation really seems to be the one that kicked a lot of the old pseudo-legendaries down a notch. Tyranitar finally fell from the top tier in singles and has seen an overall decrease in competitive usage this gen. Salamence is somehow all the way down in RU after being banned for several years in the past for being too strong. And even the once indomitable Garchomp just dropped a UU for the first time in its 18-year-long history. Which is why it comes as such a surprise that the OG pseudo-legendary Dragonite has held up as well as it has. It's even more surprising considering that Dragonite wasn't even that good of a Pokemon in the first 2 generations when hardly anything rivaled its amazing stats. But in Generation 9, Dragonite is popular on both sides of competition, singles and VGC. You know how hard it is to do that as a Gen 1 Pokemon? It's like convincing both political parties to support one candidate. It just doesn't happen. But Dragonite has been one of the biggest beneficiaries of the new terrestrialization mechanic. With Terra Normal, Dragonite becomes an absolute beast thanks to its access to extreme speed, or Flying Terra Blast finally gives Dragonite access to a really powerful physical flying move, which is something it's lacked for most of its history. But of course, it also helps that Dragonite was blessed with an amazing hidden ability in Gen 5 with Multiscale, which reduces the amount of damage it takes at full health, an ability so exclusive that it only shares it with Lugia. Speaking of Gen 1 flying types, somehow, against all odds, Moltres has recently returned as a top tier threat. And no, I don't mean its equally good Galarian counterpart. I'm talking about the original fire-flying Left 4 Dead Moltres from Kanto that's still relevant in 2024. Moltres definitely went through a bit of a rough patch from Gen 4 to Gen 6. Like Charizard, Stealth Rocks took it out of contention for quite a while on the single side, but it started climbing the rank again just a few years ago. Needless to say, the introduction of heavy-duty boots to help it negate the Stealth Rock damage made a huge difference, and allows it to use its fire-flying typing to actually wall out most of the OU tier. Its ability to take damage is only made better thanks to Will-O-Wisp and Roost, and Grass is the perfect Terra type that allows it to turn all 3 of its original weaknesses into resistances. Was Terrestrialization secretly just another way to buff Gen 1 Pokemon this entire time? Probably not, but it wouldn't surprise me. But continuing our line of Gen 1 Pokemon, we actually have 2 Pokemon from the same family that are still viable today, Clefairy and Clefable. Clefairy we've discussed before on the Pokemon carried by their abilities video, but in case you missed that one, Clefairy has access to an extremely rare ability in Friend Guard that reduces damage done to your teammate by 25%. Needless to say, this is an extremely good ability in VGC, where Clefairy can also redirect damage with Follow Me, heal itself and its teammate with Life Dew, and hold the Eviolite to make it somewhat bulky. Clefable, on the other hand, has seen much more success in recent gens on the single side of the meta, and this rise in its viability can almost entirely be attributed to the fact that it was changed from a normal type to a fairy type in Gen 6, giving Clefable remarkable defensive typing that allows it to take advantage of its crazy large pool of support-oriented moves. Clefable is basically a Swiss Army knife that can do anything from inflicting statuses to set up hazards, passing Wish onto teammates, healing itself with Soft Boiled, using Knockoff to remove threatening items. It can even run Calm Mind alongside its other high-damaging moves like Moonblast, Flamethrower, and Ice Beam to make itself an offensive threat. For a Pokemon that doesn't have a single stat over 100, it's amazing how many different roles Clefable is able to play effectively. And now, in Regulation H, Clefable is starting to see just as much usage as Clefairy, now that more Friend Guard and Eviolite users are viable in the format. Aside from Cleffa, who's a baby and is also from Gen 2, so it doesn't really count, this might just be the best aged evolution line from the Kanto region. Now, if I asked you, what Pokemon has remained at the top tier of singles for the better part of the last 2.5 decades and isn't a pseudo-legendary like Dragonite or Tyranitar, who would you think? I'll give you a second to think. Okay, seconds up. Did you guess Skarmory? Yeah, I bet you did. With Skarmory's amazing Steel Flying typing, access to hazards, and a daunting 140 base defense stat, this Pokemon was effectively future-proofed from its introduction. And in Gen 8, this Pokemon received a pretty substantial buff in the form of Body Press, allowing it to do damage with that aforementioned massive defense stat. And speaking of Pokemon with massive stats that were unusual for their times, why don't we talk about a Gen 3 Pokemon? It's the only gen of the first 4 that we haven't covered yet. I could talk about Volbeat, who had a surprisingly amazing run at Baltimore recently, Torkoal or Pelipper, who are blessed with amazing abilities, or Blaziken, who's just always been busted thanks to Speed Boost. But instead, I want to highlight a Pokemon who I haven't discussed before, Breloom. Sitting in the never used tier right now, Breloom's viability seems a bit deceptive. The only reason it's there is because it was so good at using Spore that Smogon and Showdown literally had to ban moves that cause sleep. And like Skarmory, Breloom's staggering 130 base attack stat is nuts for a Pokemon from Gen 3, especially considering this is supposed to be an early game Pokemon. Its 70 base speed may not seem like a lot, but that actually makes it the fastest user of Spore in the game, not counting Toedscruel, who has 100 base speed but is held back by Mycelium Mite without a neutralizing gas partner on the field. Terra Fighting lets this guy dodge a lot of his grass weaknesses while also powering up Mach Punch, which is already powered up by its Technician ability. An ability that fits Breloom so well that its awesome secondary ability Poison Heal is hardly ever used over it. And while it's not as common in doubles, a Breloom did finish a respectable 19th place in Baltimore. It's kinda wild because Breloom is a Gen 3 Pokemon with the sauce of a Gen 9 Pokemon. I don't even know if Game Freak realized how hard they cooked with this guy back in the day, but regardless, he's a survivor. So that's just a handful of classic Pokemon that are still relevant today. Can you think of any others? Leave them in the comments down below. But don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed, subscribe for more videos just like this one, and I'll see you guys next time.